bringing the people behind our food to life.
I have a restaurant in the West Village of Manhattan called Blue Hill, and then several years after we opened, Mr. Rockefeller, David Rockefeller, the last surviving grandson of JDR, the oil baron, came and wanted to have his own restaurant on his farm, which is about 40 miles outside of Manhattan. And it turned into an education center and farming entity with animals and vegetables and now grains, and a restaurant that helps support the education and the farming through its rent. My primary goal starting out on this was like, I really wanted to celebrate what the Hudson Valley had to offer. And it just continued to evolve, because then, we opened Stone Barns, and now we're surrounded by a farm that's growing all this unique and interesting symbiotic vegetables and grains and animals. And so how does that work into a menu? So it was kind of a continuing, evolving story that continues to evolve today. And it's part of why the book starts out in a certain way. The book that I just wrote, it starts out with really my looking for a recipe for a particular something that I found absolutely delicious, and it led me on these sort of adventures, but they were like Russian dolls. It's like every time I thought I had the answer to something, it's like something else would open up, and it taught me really through the experience of this adventure of trying to figure out, well, what's the recipe for a jaw-droppingly delicious wheat that I had. But if you were looking at only the wheat, you're looking at the wrong thing, and so it very much affected how I wrote the book, but also how I ended up preparing my menu.
Would you tell me about the third plate? I mean, that's the title of your book, but it has a deeper meaning. Yeah. How do you define the third plate?
Well, it's not a plate of food, that's for sure. It's a metaphor for a different way of eating. We have whittled down the definition of sort of good eating to a few definitions, local or sustainable, organic, and bumper sticker definitions of, go green, go local, grass-fed, or die is one I saw today on a bumper sticker in Portland. And while those are all really important and true, here I am, I guess, adding another label, which is the third plate, by saying that we need to sort of put all this together. And so the third plate is an attempt to do that, is to say, while all of these reductions and definitions are important, they're only important if we can figure out how they work in tandem. And really what we're talking about is an agriculture system that truly preserves the land, that in that way is sustainable. But in order to do that, the third plate is a way of thinking about the way we eat that helps support that vision. That's really a pattern of eating that can support a landscape. That's the true definition of a third plate. But it's not one cuisine. It's not one pattern of eating, because the cuisine to support this ecology would be very different from Southern California, very different from Texas, and very different from the Hudson Valley. And so it's not a prescription for a diet for the United States of America.
Would you just explain the difference between first and second plate?
Yeah.
Because that's an evolution.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
the third plate
yeah,
makes more sense.
The first plate would be, if you could imagine, just a steak dinner of the last, 30 years or 40 years, or in some ways you could trace this back to sort of the American expectation for dinner, which is very protein-centric. It's an 8-ounce steak on a plate with a little bit of vegetable and maybe a little bit of grain. And that's what we felt entitled to. And the second plate is a protein-centric plate, but in this case the meat is perhaps grass-fed and local, and the vegetables are organic, and the grains are whole grains, maybe, if we're lucky. And that's a much better plate of food, for sure. It's tastier. It's probably better for you. It's better for the environment. But what I came to realize with the writing of this book is that is that it's not going to change the world. And it's not the answer to the industrial food system for sure, because it's not going to feed a lot of people, in part because the architecture of the plate is the exact same. It looks the same. And what we need to do is really flip it on its head and do something that I'm calling the third plate, which again is very emblematic of a particular region. And so it's hard to define. You can't say there's one menu of a third plate for this country, but there's maybe several dozen or maybe even several hundred. They're micro cuisines, and that's what we need to look to.
Eduardo,
Yeah.
and the dehesa
Yeah.
in the southern Spain. Would you paint a picture, describe that environment and that ecosystem that exists?
Yeah.
So it's not just the foie gras,
Right.
but the whole, the jamon and the
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah. Well, I got into this farming landscape called the dehesa in Spain because I tasted a foie gras that was a natural liver. First of all, by way of context, like no one not only thought, but everyone argued. Everyone. I mean, there was no one who said, you can make a foie gras liver naturally. No one ever said that. It was sort of the bargain. It's like, if you want foie gras, you have to go through, the ducks and the geese have to go through this gavage, this force feeding. And the argument is this is incredibly inhumane and really not a very sustainable way to look at animal husbandry for the future. So I tasted this natural goose liver, and I was just blown away. So I went to Spain to what's this guy doing that everyone has been saying is impossible? It turns out he's been doing it since 1812. His great-great-grandfather was doing it in Hungary, and they exported it to Spain, and they were doing the system. And so I went to just figure out, what is Eduardo Souza doing that everyone says is impossible? And what I started to learn actually pretty quickly was that it was the system of agriculture. I learned this is the through line of everything that I learned in the book, is that whenever I was asking the recipe for the specific ingredient that I love, this jaw-dropping flavor that just propelled me to understand more, I realized I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about the particular ingredient, it was about the system that produced it, the community that produced it, the history, the culture. And here's the Russian doll thing, it kept unfolding. And so in the case of the dehesa, it turns out that Eduardo Souza was really piggybacking on a 2,000-year-old system of agriculture that was in many ways put into place to raise pigs, and the pigs were raised in this savanna-like environment that produces the most incredible hams. In many ways, because the oak trees are spaced accordingly, so the pigs can go from one oak tree to the next. They eat a lot of grass along the way, and these acorns that drop from the oak trees are incredibly delicious for the geese. For the pigs, sorry, and nutritious and fatty. And so what you get is jamon iberico, which is probably the most prized food product on earth. And chefs, covet the flavor because it's so rich and so umami rich that it's exorbitantly expensive, but a little bit goes a very long way. Anyway, I all of a sudden started to realize that Eduardo Souza was piggybacking on the dehesa system for raising pigs. It's serious that in many ways the geese were just following in the footsteps of the pigs and eating these acorns, but also, very importantly, eating the whole system that had developed around the pigs. So it wasn't just about raising these incredible acorns for the pigs. It was about raising a diversity of grasses. It was about a whole diversity of grains, vegetables, animal husbandry that produced the jamon is the same thing that produced this liver. And so this free, and Eduardo says, so eloquently in the way that he does, that really the liver is, he's a philosopher at heart and a goose whisperer. But what he says so well, I think, is that if the system is right, and if you hitch into the right system and you respect the system, what you get are these great tasting livers. And from his point of view, he said it's God telling you, thank you for allowing the geese to have such a diversity of nutrition and flavor, and now I'm going to reward you with these delicious livers. It sounds kind of, kumbaya or whatever, but he really believed it, and I started to drink the Kool-Aid too, because you see it and you're just well, you know, this is incredible, actually. I mean, the production is low, that's for sure, but the idea that you can raise what is thought to have been impossible, if it's in the right environment, is a whole nother story. And then I tried to, in my own, hubris, I tried to raise the geese at Stone Barns with the head farmer at Stone Barns, Craig Haney. When my request sort of tried to follow through on raising these natural foie gras livers, and he failed. And what I realized in the writing of this book is that while I had listened to Eduardo and drooled on his philosophical ideas of the future of great farming, I then extracted what I wanted to extract, which is like, okay, I want these livers. So I asked Craig Haney, the livestock manager at Stone Barns, to produce these geese. And we don't have the same ecology as the Dehesa, and he couldn't do it. And each year, for many successive years, we had what one cook called, when he saw the liver, failed gras. But what I came to realize is that it wasn't the geese that were failing me, I was failing the geese, because I was expecting that the geese were going to end up responding in the same way that Eduardo's geese has. I was totally wrong. And interestingly, I think in my edification, I ended up cooking a pate, which stretched these little livers into this delicious, in many ways nutritious, and we ended up preserving the livers through the winter. It was a great experience, but I learned that through culinary application, we can do the right thing for the right ecology. And I in some ways, was both so inspired by this Eduardo Dehesa example, and it's kept with me. It's a parable for really how agriculture should work. But interestingly, I demanded a result that was just impossible for the ecological conditions of my farming community.
But you learned, you through the book, it's like you can see where you've learned as you've gone along about sustainability. You've really, towards the end, it seems that you've got a much richer and much more practical, in a sense, pragmatic definition or approach to what constitutes sustainability. Would you talk about culture and cuisine?
Yeah.
And the glue, really?
Thank you for asking that. So what brings this all together is really the question that I came to sort of as a late inning revelation. It was like, if pursuing the individual ingredient is the wrong way to go, which is where every farm that I went to pointed me in these other directions, how do you bring this all together? And what I started to see was that you needed a community and a culture that supported the right kind of farming. And this is so elemental, but it was such a revelation. It really happened very late in my understanding of all these issues. And I have to say, with a degree of humbleness, I thought I was a pretty expert guy when it came to this stuff. And what I realized is that I knew very little, and what was missing, and if I could be reductive about it, because I was missing a lot, but if I could be reductive about it, it really goes to the point of that I was missing the way we eat should be supporting the kind of ecology that nature is telling us it needs to grow. Now that again sounds so elemental, but we just don't do it. And in America especially, we really don't do it. We've never forced into the kind of negotiations with the land that Europeans, for example, French cuisine is based on peasantry. It's based on French Southern peasants that eked out what the land could provide and ended up making dishes that responded to what the land could provide and made them delicious and nutritious, and they inculcated themselves into a culture, and that became part of the traditions. Those are culinary traditions that have been sustainable only because they by definition, they've lasted for thousands of years. The Italians, the same thing. thousands of micro Chinese cuisines in southern China alone, Indian cuisine. It goes on and on. Every cuisine that we think of today is really a negotiation between what the land can provide and what we can prepare in a way that supports what the landscape can provide. And the problem with American agriculture is that we've never been forced into that negotiation because our land was so rich. We were so blessed with soil fertility that we ended up never being forced in that negotiation, which is why you get an 8-ounce center cut of protein as an expectation for lunch and dinner 7 days a week. This is an anomaly. And unfortunately, it's an anomaly that we're exporting to the rest of the world, and it's disastrous for the future. And we've got to think about a different way to negotiate a plate of food, and that's what the third plate is after.